Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of True Consequences Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Carter-Landin, and today we have an extra special bonus episode. I'm bringing on one of my friends. I usually save these conversations for Patreon and Apple subscriptions, but today is a little bit different. I'm going to bring one of my pod friends on. Her name is Erin, and her podcast is Sipping on Some Crime. Hey, Erin, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for joining me. We haven't talked in a long time.
It's been a minute. I think life has just been super busy for everybody, especially around the holidays.
Yeah, it definitely has been busy for me, and I've been on the road like nonstop this year, which is exhausting.
I've seen that. You are just everywhere. That's so cool.
It's cool, but it's tiring.
I bet. Yeah. I'm one of those people that get exhausted from just so many interactions. So I totally feel that.
I get exhausted from just existing, so.
Same.
But for those of you that don't know, Erin and her podcast, Erin helped cover Jacob's story early on when I started asking for help. She was one of the first people to raise her hand and help me, and I am forever grateful to you for that. I think you did an amazing job on that episode, and if you haven't listened to it, I recommend. But Erin, can you tell us a little bit about your podcast, what inspired you to start the podcast, and what your goal is with it?
So for me, I grew up always kind of, the kid that was always watching the news stories, unsolved mysteries. And I always just got extremely frustrated and angry that cases weren't solved or they weren't getting the resources they needed, to a point where I was like physically like upset. Like, why aren't other people angry and mad about this? And of course, as I got older, I was listening to podcasts and reading about cases. And I thought, well, it doesn't hurt to be able to amplify a voice in a space. Like if I'm another voice that can lend a voice to a story that needs it, let's do it. Why not? Instead of just signing petitions, which is amazing, and sharing all these things, I felt like I just wasn't doing enough. So I wanted to do more.
And the cases you cover, is there like a specific thing you look for? I mean, obviously, if they need help amplifying the voice, but is there anything else you look for with cases you cover?
Really, for me, it's if it didn't get what I feel is some form of injustice. So some cases I've covered, people are like, okay, well, we know who did it. But for me, if, we didn't get to bring remains home and a family doesn't get to lay that person to rest and have that piece of it, I think it's an injustice. I mean, I believe everybody needs to come home. I believe that if I'm looking at a case and I feel like I hate the word closure because closure isn't the correct form. There is no closure on losing someone you love. But if we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle, then we're not done.
I think that's a really good point. And I agree with you. Closure is definitely not something that really ever happens. I don't think that there is such a thing as closure. My goal is always to bring, hopefully, some more peace, whether it's peace of mind or some kind of peace to the family. And that's what I'm always hoping for, because the grief never stops. It never goes away. You never stop missing the person that you lost. But, with the injustice on top of that, it almost makes it worse.
Right. And I think something that people don't really necessarily know until you work with families is every single family's definition of what's going to bring them peace is different. So I've worked with families that say at this point, I don't care who did it. I don't care why they did it. I just want to know where my missing person is. Like I need that part of it. Some people say, I just want my day in court, whether it's a guilty verdict or not. I just want the world to know their name and for this person to stand in front of their peers and have to stand trial. So for each family, it's so different. And I think that's a discussion that a lot of people don't have. And it really is personal to the family.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. I think every family has a different need when it comes to finding that peace and finding, some level of comfort in the midst of all of the tragedy. And like for me and my family, it is, I want that day in court. I want people to know what happened, and I want people to know who did it, whether or not he gets convicted, whether or not he goes to jail. Like, yeah, that would be great. Just because the only reason I want that is so that he can't hurt anybody else. It's not even really about anything other than that. And that's honestly, that's what's bothered me the most about Jacob's case over the last 35 years, is that he's had that much time to cause more pain and to wreak more havoc in the lives of other people. And I want that day in court. We did get the validation from the Attorney General, who said they apologized on behalf of the state of New Mexico. And, they said that they didn't do the right thing in 1987, which, everybody knows that. But
right.
but
Glaringly, obviously, yeah.
Captain Obvious. But it was nice to get that apology. That was good.
Yeah, it matters. And I think there's a difference between validation and accountability. So I think those are two very different things. And the validation is great. Validation, it matters, but accountability for actions, that's the end goal for a lot of families. They want the person to be held accountable. I mean, you have cases where it drives me nuts that we have to say alleged. We want to be able to take that word away and say, no, we know this happened. We have to say alleged because of the rules of society, but this isn't fair. Now it's time to be accountable.
Absolutely. Accountability is a huge piece of it. And I think that it is an important piece. It's really hard for me as a family member to see how families are treated in the justice system, to see how victims are treated in the justice system, and also online. There's so much negativity. There's so much second guessing. There's so much hatred that goes towards the families that are already suffering enough. They don't need more suffering. It's one of the things that you probably know because we interact on social media, but it's something that I'm constantly talking about is this is real. This is real life. This isn't just a story.
Right. And it's so unbelievably frustrating. There's a few Twitter accounts that I don't understand how they have such a high subscribers. And I'm seeing it today with a few of the very, in the media cases right now. And they're just throwing things to the wall to see if they stick so they can get their 5 minutes of clout. But all that you're throwing to the wall, 50% of it might stick. And they're holding on to, 50% of what I said stuck. But they're dragging through family members. They're dragging through innocent people. They're putting up misinformation, and they're truly hurting the case. They don't think that they have an impact. But when you have 20,000 followers and you're saying all these things that aren't true, you're having an impact.
I think that's a huge point. And it's a conversation I had with somebody who kind of confronted me recently about a tweet I posted about, speculation in true crime, about sensationalism in true crime. And they were like, well, I wanted to ask you, what do you mean by that? Because we always put out all the theories that are out. And so I'm going to go on the record now and just be clear about what I'm talking about. I think it's perfectly fine if there are theories out there, especially if law enforcement has brought these theories out in the open. I think it's okay to talk about those theories. I think it's okay to talk about theories that you might even have. But when you start to fabricate facts or fabricate things that support your theory in order to make your theory seem more realistic, that's a problem. If you present all the facts and you say, we don't know what happened, but here are some theories that people have put out there, I think that's probably okay too. But it's the blatant misinformation. The blatant misinformation is really the problem in this situation, because sometimes you may hear something, and I think this is going to segue us into our next part of this conversation, but sometimes you hear something in a podcast or in a news report, and it may not be true, and it could cause people to just stop caring about the case and to stop being willing to share because they feel like, oh, well, we already know. I have a good example of that. The young girl that they just found, her remains in Texas. What is her name again? The one that was hit by the FedEx driver.
Oh, yeah. Athena.
So you look at that situation where she goes missing. Immediately, people are like, it was the stepmom. It was the stepmom. We know she did it.
Yes. Thank you. I said the same thing.
And that kind of mentality, could have led to people not caring.
Right. Exactly. 100%. And that mother, she's a stepmom. So already you get a bad rep. But she loved that child. You're demonizing her and her relationship in seconds.
Without knowing anything about her or the situation or anything.
Right.
So I think that there is this propensity for people to really latch on to things. it can be very picky and choosy about that, and then kind of run with these notions that may or may not be true. And I think this is a great way to talk about, how we talk about victims, how we talk about missing people, missing kids in this country and in the world even. And I think this is something that the reason I asked you to be on the show is because you posted something online that really stuck with me. And it's been bothering me for a while now, ever since I read that. And I want to thank you for bringing that to my attention, because honestly, I wasn't really thinking about it. So you posted something about change the vocabulary. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, definitely. So with changing the vocabulary, being a runaway child myself and getting to see all sides of it, getting to be in the system, getting to understand how it works is instantly when you put the label runaway to a child, it changes everyone's perspective of that child. Law enforcement, it changes the media perspective. It instantly changes how it's investigated from the initial phone call to the police from the family, the guardian, or the care facility that they're staying at. And what we tend to do and what we tend to see is when we do see these missing posters for children, you will see missing or you will see runaway. And you will instantly see, if you pay attention and you open these comments and you're looking, you're going to see the missing one. People are praying, they want answers, they're very involved. How can I help? When you see runaway, it gets a completely different interaction. Runaway is, well, they're probably not listening. They'll probably just come back. Why, or especially if they get the description of, a continuous runaway, troubled child. It's like the media doesn't care. It's almost like, well, they deserve it. Like they're gone. It's no big deal. It's whatever. But we should know in the true crime world, right? We should understand how many cases have we worked on where the parents, guardian, care facility had a responsibility of what happened to that child and initially called it as a runaway because they know how it's going to be looked at. They know that that kid's not going to get the attention they need. Was Dylan Redwine, was he called as a runaway?
No, he was missing. And I think that's mostly because his mom and her son, Corey, I think they were the ones that were leading that charge. If Mark would have been involved, and he did try to say that, he did try to say, oh yeah, he just took off. He went to his friend's house, this and that. If anybody would have been taking him seriously, I think we would have seen the same thing with Dylan.
Exactly. And I think it would have definitely changed the trajectory of that case. I mean, when you report a child as a runaway, I know as the runaway, when you report a child as a runaway, most of the time officers don't even visit the parent guardian home. So they'll call, they'll take the report. They're going to tell the parents like, hey, don't worry about it. They're probably out with friends. They're probably doing A and B. Don't worry, they'll come home. And it'll take 2 or 3 days, it was especially when I was a kid, for it to get reported. Now, as a kid, as that was a runaway, that was an advantage to me. I knew that I had 2 to 3 days before anybody was looking for me. I could get really, really far. However, in those 2 to 3 days, something horrible could have happened to me and nobody was looking for me.
And because nobody was looking for you, the trail to find you probably would have been very difficult. We all know that time is of the essence when it comes to somebody going missing, when somebody's in danger. Even if they did run away, time is of the essence because you could easily get lost in 2 or 3 days and nobody would ever know.
Oh, exactly. And easily trafficked. A lot of children, runaways, are trafficked. And it also brings me back to when we say that certain kids are missing or that they ran away. Understanding that a runaway has to have a network. And that network is not easy to establish. It changes, pieces fall in and out, and you find yourself in situations where you have nowhere to go and no one to count on, and you're desperate. So when we have these kids that we're saying are runaways, or they're missing, and we're 5 years, I want to even say 5 months in. We're 5 months in and we haven't found them. We don't know where they are. It's either they have an incredibly well-established network that has no failures in it, and everybody is watching out for them and they're completely covered, or the child is missing. Something happened. It doesn't matter if they left on their own accord, which is what I wish we would change. I am not trying to take away the fact that children run away. I am not trying to remove that from the conversation. It is a very important conversation. We need to find out why they run away, what happens, how we can get more family and care intervention, because a child typically isn't just running away because they don't want to listen to the rules at home, but we've well established that under the term of runaway, that they are just a troubled child that doesn't want to listen. They are if you look up runaway, you usually see runaway and throwaway child right next to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there should set alarm bells. So when we're reporting these kids, we need to get them out to the media. We need to know, to be out on the lookout. Instead of putting runaway, we need to put missing. And then in the description, we can say, we believe child has left on their own accord. Because until you talk to that child, until you find them, you're only taking the word of the person that's reporting them.
And it's really hard to know what kind of situation these kids are living in too. Like you don't know if they're being abused. You don't know if there's drug abuse in the home or things that are really not good for them to be exposed to. I mean, kids run away for a variety of reasons. It's not always because, they're running away from consequences because they're troublemakers. And even the behavior of a quote troublemaker, really, it comes from somewhere. It comes from a place of acting out against something or against someone.
Exactly. And it's something that we don't talk about because it's uncomfortable. Children is a hot button topic. I'm sure you find when you cover cases that are children, people are like, ooh, this one's going to be hard. Like I have to put myself in a mode to sit down and listen to this and take it in because children are innocent. They should be protected. And there's something internal inside of us. We carry our little selves inside of us throughout life. And we feel like, oh, I wouldn't want that to have happened to my child, to me. It's a very hard thing to actually have a conversation about, but we have to. There are families all over. And I will tell you, growing up for me, it felt safer outside than in my home. So why wouldn't I run? And that's what a lot of these kids are facing.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I think there were moments where I wanted to run away from my situation because it did feel safer to be out in the street than it did in my house. I didn't know if I was going to make it to the next day. I didn't know if I was going to die. Like it just didn't make any sense. So I'm looking at this website. It's familyresourcesinc.org. And it says that, I'm just going to read it verbatim really quick. Abuse is at the core of why kids run away. There are many reasons why kids and teens decide to leave home, but it is rarely an easy decision. Too often, youth reach a breaking point where they can't face another day of school bullying, parental abuse, stress, or hunger. The National Runaway Safe Line has some statistics on why children run away. 47% of children experience conflicts with parents or guardians at home. 34% of runaways experienced sexual abuse at home, and 43% of teens reported physical abuse as one of the main reasons they left home. So it looks like a very high percentage of kids who run away are running away from some form of abuse or stress or something, neglect.
Right. Exactly. And now we have more research now, but as a runaway in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 60s, I mean, in my time, I would be assigned, CPS might get involved. I might get a guardian ad litem. I might get a caseworker. I would have to go and stand in front of a judge. But you're also, during all this time, you're put in front of your abuser and being told, like, tell us how they abuse you. It's fine. Like, we've got this. It's going to be cool. And then they leave you with the abuser while they process everything. So what do you think it's like at home after you've already, anytime you speak? So kids learn to stop speaking, right? Like we learn to just be quiet, ride it through. And there's habitual runners like me where you just run. You come home and you're like, I'm going to have to face this, whatever is coming for me next. And then I'm going to face it as long as I possibly can. And then I'm going to run again. Because even though they're going to bring me back, I'm going to get a break from it.
Right.
And we don't talk about that. And I found it very interesting. I was looking, if you're trying to look the definition of runaway, there's so many, but it's very broad of just like, if you Google it, the very broad definition is that it's an adolescent that's left home or their resident without parent or guardian permission. It's just a very broad definition. So we're not digging any deeper into that definition. So that's, I think, the broad understanding that people have of the term runaway. They're not digging any deeper. And I found an interesting article in 2016 from Sparks, Nevada, and they interview the police chief, Carl, and he talks about how he handles missing person cases, and he wants to make it very clear in the beginning of the article that there is not this 24-hour window or anything that people have to report. He says if it meets their criteria, right away they will take it immediately. So right there in his statement, it meets his criteria, the reporting officer's criteria. Everybody's got a different view and perspective when they're taking that report. So you're saying that you have this kind of formulated criteria, and it's solely up to that person that picks up the phone first and takes that report of how far we're going to go. They get to make the judgment call on this kid. They don't know anything about them, but they're making that judgment call. It's just, and he talks about how we take such a high number of runaway reports, and we generally don't publicize those runaway children unless certain conditions are met. But he refuses to discuss what the conditions are.
It's really bizarre. And this is something that I've come across, especially in dealing with, missing and murdered Indigenous persons in New Mexico and looking into these cases, is that oftentimes the discretion of the person who is taking the report is skewed and based on their own biases, based on their own perspective on whether it's children or Native people. Those perspectives often will skew the people to where they don't take a report. And I can't believe that we even have to have this conversation, that I even have to talk about this on my show. Like, if somebody is reporting somebody missing, take the report. Like, what's that going to cost you other than time?
Exactly. And that's what these officers try to say. And he kind of breaks down to like, well, we can't use all our resources on every child. Yes, you can. Absolutely, you can use your resources on every single child. We have these massive police budgets. Don't get me started. It's going to drive me nuts. But if you look at your state and you look at your county, you're going to see these massive budgets. And then you're going to look at where their budgets are going. And they're going on stuff like, some big cities like Baltimore, we're buying tanks and riot gear for protesters. And you're going to tell me you don't have time to send an officer to a house where someone has reported a child missing to meet the person in person that's reporting this, get an actual feel of where they disappeared from. I get that you can't just say, okay, well, you're reporting them missing. Let me look through the whole house. I understand that, but you need to meet them in person. You need to be taking that report. You're going to tell me we don't have the resources, but Baltimore has a tank. What do we need a tank for?
Yeah, it's more about allocation of resources and focusing on what's important versus what they perceive to be important, right?
Right, exactly. And we go to talking about having trained professionals like social workers to be able to take these calls. It would almost be better if social workers were taking these calls with dispatch and fielding them over. Someone that is trained and works and understands family dynamics and everything that's going on, to be able to say, hey, something's not right about this, or we should look over here. But no matter what it is, when that child is reported, how much of a resource is it for the police department who already has a Twitter to go on and put the picture of the child that's missing? How much of a resource did that cost?
Yeah. Less than a tank, probably.
Right? It makes me so bad that Baltimore has a tank, because we have so many issues in Baltimore, and our missing kids. I follow the Baltimore Police Department's thread on Twitter, and I'm posting 5 to 6 missing kids daily, easily. But those are only the ones that they have decided are worthy. I mean, you really literally are telling someone's family, someone's child, they're not worthy of our resources.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't even have to say anything for you to be saying that, right? It's just your inaction.
Right, exactly. And it's kind of crazy because I could, I have the newspapers.com, and I wanted to just I was like, you know what, let's put in runaway child and let's start in 1900. And let's just go back and check things out. And you can see from the New York Times to like the Nebraska Journal that the missing child and the runaway are very highly portrayed, very different. Perfect example, they had this one young girl, she was 15, and they called her a runaway who also abducted her lover. Her lover, who was 35 years old, who came and picked her up and took her away to go marry her. This is 1900 and it's in Nebraska. He picks her up. They're going to run away and get married. They find them at a hotel. They arrest her, send him on his way, and then they make her go to one of those like care facilities to retrain how to be a proper young lady.
Oh my God.
That was a missing child. That wasn't a runaway. And that it was worded that she abducted her lover with her, a 35-year-old man. I was just so mind blown. So we've had this mindset. I'm like, how long has this runaway had a bad connotation to it? It's had it from the very beginning. It doesn't matter how far we go back. Mm-hmm. The second you label a child a runaway, you're like, well, what'd they do? And that shouldn't be, nobody should be saying, well, what did they do?
I think that is, something that I talk about all the time with every case. It doesn't matter what they did. It doesn't matter what the victim did. It doesn't matter what the missing kid did. None of that matters. What matters is that this person needs help. And are you going to help them or not? Do you care about victims or not?
Right. It's super simple. Every single person is worthy to be brought home, to be found, to be kept safe. It's really not a hard equation to understand for a lot of people. It seems to be. I've had full conversations with people that are like, oh, well, she ran away and she hid and we used police resources and we found her. What a spoiled little brat. Okay. Do you know what's going on at home? Do you know children don't want to pick up their belongings and leave? They don't. No. That's not an easy choice for a child.
Yeah, leaving the only semblance of hopefully safety and security that you have, which you may or may, it may not be the case. It may be the most violent, intense house situation that, would make people of an adult age run away. It's hard to say.
Right. But when you grow up in a violent, intense situation all the time, do you know any different? That's still all you know, right? Like that's still your baseline of normality. And I think you start to put it together as a kid, when you see your friends and you go to other places and you're like, whoa, okay, so my stuff's not normal. Like these are things that we know just not to talk about or not to associate with our friends. We're like, oh, okay, so you guys do this differently. That's weird. So you get like little pictures of it. But as a child, I mean, if it's your whole world, it's really hard to see outside of that whole world and to know something's wrong. So if that kid finally packs that bag and goes, we have to understand that they finally have hit their limit. And a lot of kids, it's something I think we also don't pay attention to is a lot of these kids are running because it's either running or taking yourself out because you just literally cannot deal with what is happening right now.
Yeah, it's true. And I definitely relate to that. I did run away. Luckily, I had family that was trustworthy that I could go to. And then when I was a teenager, I had friends who had their own places that allowed me to crash on their sofas and stuff like that. So I get it.
Right. You built a network. You spend years building a network. Absolutely.
It's true. This really struck a chord with me. And I've been thinking about it ever since I saw that post that you made. And I even had this thing on my page where I saw somebody had posted, I think it was the police had posted runaway. And it was like a week or two after I saw your post. And so I took the post, I took the picture, I copied all the pertinent information, made a new post and just wrote missing and shared it. And then I went back to that post and I commented on there and I said, shared. And then I did hashtag change the vocabulary.
Oh, thank you.
And then somebody got really mad at me. They were like, just share the stupid thing. Nobody cares about whatever you think. Da, 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 da.
Oh my goodness. So like people just like the things that people want to be upset about in this world. And I think that drives, I think anybody in the true crime space that's there for the right reasons gets so frustrated because you're wasting like valuable energy on the most useless argument and the one that's not helping anybody at all.
Well, that's usually the case, right?
Right.
The least helpful person's the one causing the most problems.
Seriously, what does my mother always say? The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Like, yeah, they're
Yeah.
the ones that, cause the most problems and then start this whole thread of conversation where you're just like, okay, well, there's still a missing child and it
Yeah.
needs to be the focus of the conversation. And it is essential. It is essential to understand that this child might have walked away on their own accord. It is very essential. I understand that we have to put that in at the beginning. I mean, I don't necessarily think it has to be there, but if, as law enforcement or media, if you feel like it's essential to report the facts, then report the facts. The child may have run away may have left on their own accord. You don't have to use the word runaway. You really
Mm-hmm.
don't.
Yeah, there's a negative connotation to that. There's a mentality of it's just a spoiled brat, just another kid who doesn't respect their elders or doesn't care about whatever. Like instantly, like you said, they become a throwaway person. And I think that it's really, really good to have this conversation and to talk about it because it's not something that is really out there yet. It's not something that people are really pushing for on a bigger scale yet. And I think this is right in line with the kind of ethical response to true crime. This is important. It's an ethical matter here because you're talking about either discounting somebody's existence or right to be found versus actually trying to help them.
Exactly. And the thing is, we see it on a global perspective. Like you were saying before, like these things in true crime, when we cover cases here, and we have the chance to cover cases in other parts of the world, we see that there are themes that are global. And a global theme is runaway, throwaway child. And we see it all over. I covered a case in England. Sarah Benford, I believe is her last name. And she was a habitual runaway. CPS had entered her life when she was like 2, and she was pulled in and out of her family home and put into different care facilities throughout her life. And by 14, she had run away so many times that the care facility was just like, whatever. We're not going to report her missing. And her mother, she had seen her mother that day at an arcade. They had gotten in an argument, and she knew that her daughter wasn't going to go back to the care facility after that argument. She knew. She knew where her daughter was going to go, a house that she didn't want her at, she thought was dangerous. She called the police and she reported it. And they said, she's a habitual runaway. They literally told her, we are not wasting any more resources to go get Sarah. We're just not doing it. That was the last time Sarah was ever seen. She was 14 years old. How are you going to tell me that a 14-year-old child is not worth the resources? How? And when you take a deeper look into it and you find that, whenever she would leave these centers, she would come back with either a drug addiction problem or they'd find her with these older men because she would get so desperate not to go into another foster care system or so desperate not to go back to another care facility that she would trust people to sleep on their couches and bad things would happen to her. And they would find her, they would bring her back, they would have these conversations and they would tell her, well, you need to make better choices. You're the one that's choosing to make these choices. If you would just sit here in this facility and do what we tell you, things would be fine. And nobody was helping her.
Unbelievable. It's so maddening. So maddening. I can't even fathom. And then, the fact that there's really no accountability for somebody who just blatantly ignores a missing person. Like what happens? Nothing.
Right. Absolutely nothing. And the media is just as responsible because we see it in cases, with her case, it was really great. What I liked about her case that was interesting is The Guardian did a report. There's a reporter, I wish I could think of her name off the top of my head right now, but she actually talked about how her colleagues reported Sarah missing and how they put runaway, troubled child in the title. And she was ashamed of them. She was like, you put runaway, you put troubled child because you talked to the police or you talked to the care facility she was at, but you didn't talk to her family. You didn't talk to the kids that knew her and understood what she was going through. You all should be ashamed of yourself. You discredit her life like it was nothing.
Wow.
It was really awesome to see. And we honestly don't have research, like genuine, solid 100% research on missing kids, right? Because we have these police departments that say, well, they weren't considered missing, or they came back in a few days, or we didn't feel like taking this report, or they just don't make a report right? We find out like years later that the report was never made and this child is still missing. So it's hard to collect data. And I know that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children have done a great job of coming in and trying to be that person, but no one is required to report to them except for care facilities. So, when they're collecting this data, this is voluntary data from parents and guardians. And I think in 2021, they had 94,428 cases of missing kids reported through their agency. Now, 2014, until 2014, this angered me so much. Until 2014, if you were a child in the United States that was in a care facility, foster care, under state or federal care, you didn't have a qualified time and when you had to report that child missing.
What?
Yeah, you didn't have to report them missing. You would think like parent guardian, like we have like this weird window there, right? Of if they're going to report, we say they have to, but you can't force someone to do something, especially if you don't know, right? But these care facilities weren't held to any certain specific time and when they had to report them missing, which I knew as a kid. And that's how I got out of so many care facilities, was because I knew I'm already labeled a habitual runaway. They're not going to waste my time.
Right.
They're not going to waste time on me. So I'm going to run. It's going to take them 5 or 6 days to report me. I'm going to be miles away. This is awesome. This is a complete advantage for me. It wasn't until 2014 that we made it a law that in a care facility, you have to report a child within 24 hours.
Wow. That's good. I'm glad they're doing that now.
Yeah.
It's sad it took so long.
2014.
Yeah.
Right. And then we still don't have solid statistics, and I think we still struggle with like state guidelines and follow through. Honestly, we have so many kids, I think, big cases where they walked away from care facilities and they just weren't reported.
Wow. It's so eye-opening for me as a content creator who covers true crime to have this conversation with you. I really want to thank you so much for bringing this to my attention, for bringing this to my listeners' attention, for your willingness to talk about it, because I think it's something that unless you've been there, unless you've experienced it, it's not something that you even think about. I never thought about the term runaway as being problematic or resulting in people completely ignoring a missing person like that. I can't thank you enough for opening my eyes to this. And I'm always wanting to learn. I'm always wanting to grow and improve and, help move the needle forward slowly with ethical true crime content creation, but also ethical reporting on these cases.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I love about our community. There's a lot, I think there's a lot more positivity than negative. I think we see, some of the negatives, but it's learning from each other and each other's experiences in life. I came into this space to help people because I know what it feels like to not have those resources and to desperately want help. And I didn't realize how much being a runaway was going to help me connect and understand to these cases. Like, I just didn't, for a while, I would see some of these cases and I would get so angry and I'm like, why is nobody having the conversation? They're saying that, Bernadette Walker is a famous, pretty big case from England. Her parents harmed her, and then you can hear them in the dispatch calling and specifically notating that she's a runaway because they know that it's going to take 2 or 3 days for them to come to the house to investigate, which gave them 2 or 3 more days to cover everything. And these families are there's families that create runaway letters. There's families, it's the fact that the perpetrator knows I can harm this child, and as long as I report them a runaway, it's going to get less traction. It's just heartening and so sad. And I just wanted the world to be aware of it. Be wary when you see runaway. Just pay attention to it. Just in your mind, focus. And it's been a hard thing for me because I'm always like, I know I was running and I didn't want my picture out there. So I have always this moment of ooh, should I share this? Of course I need to share this. Because I know the dangers, I need to protect them. But, as a runaway, you're like, well, I don't want them to get caught if they're trying to get away. It's this internal conflict that I always deal with, but I will always share them.
Well, yeah, because unfortunately, if they do get caught, they may be brought back to their abusers if they are being abused. But the risk of them, being trafficked or being harmed by somebody with bad intentions is also there. And that needs to be considered. And what can my listeners do? What can the general public do to help help kids who are missing. I'm just going to say it like that.
Oh, I love that. That's exactly what it is. It's just like what you said with your post before. When you're seeing it, once it's in your head and you start seeing runaway, you can share those pictures and those posts. And sometimes it's a missing poster and it unfortunately has big red letters that say runaway. You can share that information. You can go and you can copy and paste and kind of change the words around about the actual information. And you can just change it to hashtag missing in big all capital letters. Let's make that the focus. If we don't know where a child is, it does not matter their circumstance. It does not matter where they come from. It does not matter where they possibly went or how they went there. They are missing until we find them and we verify what happened with them. They're missing. It's very, very, if we can look at it in that most simplistic form, that if a child under 18, we don't know where they're at, they're missing. They are all worthy of the title missing.
Absolutely. So well said. Again, I'm so grateful to you. You, even though we don't really talk that much, we do connect on social media, but you always are inspiring to me, and you are always just such a joy to interact with. I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful that you're involved in my life and in my fight for Jacob. And I can't thank you enough, honestly.
You are so kind and absolutely the same. You inspire me. I love watching what you're doing, and I love that you're able to do it for everybody. Like, you don't care who they are, where they come from. You don't have qualifiers. And I know that's weird to say because some content creators do have qualifiers. Like, you don't have qualifiers. You jump in and you help people where they need it. And for me, that's like a huge connection. Like, I think people that are genuinely in it to be in it to help and make a difference, we see each other and we're always going to have each other's back. And I am always going to be in you and Jacob's corner.
Always be in your corner too. Where can my listeners find your show and find you?
So Sipping on Some Crime is on all the podcast platforms. I do have sippingonsome.com. And of course, they can find me on Twitter at dysfunctly, at some sipping on Twitter.
Okay. Awesome. Well, go listen to Erin's show, give her some love, show her some support. And if you see a runaway missing poster, get the photos, get the information, just change it to hashtag missing. Let's change the vocabulary. Let's make sure that no matter what the situation is, if a kid is missing, everybody is able to look for them and to help them be found so that they are not in harm's way.
Love it.
All right. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening. Stay safe, New Mexico.